My name is Elena Brooks, and the day the VP told a room full of executives that I would never lead here, I smiled and thanked him for his feedback. We were in conference room A, the large one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown. 12 senior leaders sat around the table. I'd just finished presenting a quarterly strategy review when he interrupted. Elena, I appreciate your work ethic, but let's be realistic. You're great at execution. That's your strength. Leadership requires a different skill set, one you simply don't have. His tone was pleasant, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. You'll never lead here. Best to accept that and focus on what you do well. The room went silent. A few people looked at their laptops. Someone coughed. Nobody defended me. Nobody said a word. I felt my face flush, but kept my expression neutral. Thank you for the honest feedback, I said calmly. I appreciate your perspective. I collected my materials and walked out with my head high. Behind me, I heard the meeting continue as if nothing significant had happened. What he didn't know was that I'd already started documenting everything. And his mistake wasn't humiliating me. It was underestimating what I'd do about it. Let me tell you who I actually was at Sterling Dynamics. I was Elena Brooks, Senior Strategy Manager, 34 years old, with 7 years at the company. I hadn't come up through executive sponsorship or political connections. I'd simply delivered results consistently, year after year. I'd led the product launch that generated $68 million in first-year revenue, restructured our regional operations to reduce costs by 14% while improving efficiency, built client relationships that consistently received satisfaction scores above 95%, mentored 12 direct reports who'd all been promoted under my leadership. My performance reviews were consistently exceptional. My teams were loyal and productive. Directors from other departments requested my involvement on cross-functional projects. I wasn't loud about my achievements, but they were documented and undeniable. I'd never played office politics, never networked aggressively at company events, never positioned myself as the most visible person in strategy meetings. I just did excellent work and assumed that would be enough for advancement. That assumption had been naive, because in corporate environments, competence without visibility often means being overlooked. And being overlooked meant that people like the VP could publicly dismiss me without consequence. At least, that's what he thought. The VP's name was Cameron Foster. He was 46, impeccably dressed, and had a reputation for being tough but fair, which was corporate code for cruel but powerful enough that nobody challenges him. He'd been VP of strategy for 3 years, rising quickly through a combination of charisma, strategic alliances with board members, and an ability to take credit for other people's work. In public settings, Cameron was charming, articulate, compelling. He gave presentations that made complex strategies sound visionary. Board members praised his strategic thinking. The CEO valued his counsel. In private, he was different, cutting, dismissive. He had a particular talent for delivering criticism that felt reasonable in the moment but left you questioning your own competence hours later. He perfected the art of humiliation disguised as mentorship. Women particularly seemed to trigger his need to diminish. 3 female directors had left his division in the past 2 years. All talented, all cited limited growth opportunities in their exit interviews. The pattern was obvious to anyone paying attention, but nobody with power seemed to care. Cameron ruled through fear and favoritism. People competed for his approval. Nobody challenged his assessments. He built an empire where his word was treated as objective truth. And that confidence, that absolute certainty in his own judgment, was about to become his biggest vulnerability. The meeting happened on a Wednesday morning. I'd been invited to present our Q3 strategy execution results to the senior leadership team. Standard quarterly review. I prepared thoroughly, as always, with detailed metrics, analysis, and recommendations. I was halfway through my presentation when Cameron interrupted. Elena, can I stop you there? I think we need to address something directly. I paused, waiting. You're presenting as if you're positioning for a leadership role. But I want to be clear with everyone in this room. Elena is an excellent executor. She implements strategies effectively, but she doesn't have the strategic vision or executive presence required for leadership here. He looked around the table, making eye contact with other executives. I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm being realistic. Elena, you'll never lead here. You need to accept your strengths and stop reaching for roles you're not suited for. Focus on execution. That's where you add value. The words hung in the air. Public. Definitive. Humiliating. Designed to put me in my place permanently. I looked at him calmly. Thank you for your feedback, Cameron. I appreciate you being direct. Good. I'm glad you understand. He smiled. Now, let's move on to the next agenda item. I gathered my materials and left. Behind me, the meeting continued. Nobody said anything. Nobody questioned his assessment. His word was law. Walking back to my office, I felt rage burning in my chest. But I didn't slam doors. Didn't send angry emails. Didn't call colleagues to complain. Because I understood something fundamental about corporate power. Emotional reactions would destroy my credibility faster than Cameron ever could. If I defended myself in that moment, I'd have been labeled defensive. If I'd argued, I'd have been called difficult. If I'd shown anger, I'd have been dismissed as emotional. Cameron had set a trap, and responding visibly would have sprung it. Women in corporate environments face an impossible standard. Show emotion, and you're unprofessional. Don't show emotion, and you're cold. Challenge powerful men, and you're aggressive. Stay quiet, and you're weak. There's no winning move in the moment, but there are winning moves over time. They just require patience, documentation, and strategic silence. Cameron expected me to either fight back immediately, giving him justification to marginalize me further, or accept his assessment quietly and fade into irrelevance. I chose a third option. I stayed calm, maintained professionalism, and began systematically building a case. Not for confrontation, for consequences, the kind that come from institutional pressure, not individual complaints. Because the person who shouts loses, but the person who documents wins. Eventually, here's what Cameron didn't know about me. I'd been documenting everything for years. Not because I expected betrayal, but because precision was how I worked. Every project had comprehensive files. Every decision had supporting evidence. Every accomplishment had timestamps, approvals, and outcome metrics. I had emails showing project origins, strategy development, implementation decisions. I had performance reviews from multiple managers praising my strategic thinking and leadership capabilities. I had feedback from direct reports, peers, and clients. 7 years of evidence that contradicted Cameron's public assessment. More importantly, I had relationships Cameron didn't know about. Cross-functional partnerships with directors in finance, operations, and technology. People who'd worked with me directly and trusted my judgment. People who weren't in Cameron's inner circle. And I had something else. Credibility with the board. Not through political maneuvering, but through results. 2 board members had specifically mentioned my work in quarterly reviews. One had asked me directly about strategic initiatives during a company meeting. They knew my name. They knew my work. Cameron saw me as invisible because I didn't perform in meetings the way he did. He mistook quiet competence for lack of capability. He assumed that because I didn't seek attention, I had no influence. That assumption was about to cost him everything. The project Cameron was most proud of, the one he presented to the board as a strategic triumph, was the Regional Integration Initiative. It had consolidated 3 separate regional operations into a unified structure, saving the company millions while improving efficiency. Cameron had presented it masterfully. Compelling vision, clear metrics, confident delivery. The board had approved significant budget, praised his leadership, and positioned it as a model for future strategic initiatives. What they didn't know, what Cameron had deliberately obscured, was that I'd built that initiative from the ground up. I'd identified the opportunity 18 months earlier, analyzed regional operations, interviewed hundreds of employees, modeled financial impacts, developed implementation roadmaps, managed every phase of execution. Cameron had entered at month 14, when the project was 90% complete. He'd attended final presentations, added a signature to documents, and then presented the entire initiative to the board as a strategic vision. I'd watched it happen. Watched my 18 months of work become his 6-week triumph. Watched him accept congratulations for strategy I'd developed, execution I'd led, results I'd delivered. And I'd said nothing, because challenging him publicly would have been futile. But I'd kept every document, every email, every draft, every timeline, complete proof of origin, development, and ownership. The first receipt was simple. An email I'd sent to my former manager 21 months earlier outlining the regional integration opportunity. Subject line: Potential Efficiency Initiative, Regional Operations Analysis. The email detailed everything. The problem I'd identified. Preliminary research showing redundancies across regions. Rough estimates of potential savings. Request for approval to conduct comprehensive analysis. My manager had responded enthusiastically. This could be significant. Put together a detailed proposal, and we'll discuss with senior leadership. I had that email thread, time-stamped, showing that the initiative originated with me, not Cameron. That the strategic insight came from my analysis, not his vision. That months before he was involved, I'd already identified the opportunity and begun building the solution. Small receipt, but critical, because it established origin. And origin matters when someone claims credit for work they didn't do. I had dozens more. Emails requesting data, approvals for analysis phases, budget requests I'd submitted, timelines I'd created, vendor negotiations I'd led, implementation plans I'd drafted. 18 months of digital evidence showing systematic development of an initiative Cameron later claimed as his own. He probably never considered that I'd kept everything, that I documented reflexively, that the project he'd stolen had left a trail he couldn't erase. After the public humiliation, I did something strategic. I let Cameron keep talking, keep dismissing me, keep positioning himself as the authority on who deserved leadership and who didn't. In subsequent meetings, he'd reference my limitations casually. Elena's great at the tactical work, but we need strategic thinking here. Or, let's get someone with executive presence to present this to the board. Always polite, always framed as objective assessment. He grew bolder over the following weeks, more explicit in dismissing my contributions, more comfortable publicly positioning me as an implementer who couldn't think strategically. And I let him. Stayed quiet, maintained professionalism, gave him no pushback whatsoever. Colleagues noticed. Some seemed uncomfortable. A few privately expressed sympathy. But nobody challenged Cameron, because challenging the VP meant risking their own careers. Corporate survival requires knowing which battles are unwinnable. Cameron interpreted my silence as acceptance, as resignation, as proof that his assessment had been correct, that I lacked the strength or capability for leadership. My quietness confirmed his narrative. What he didn't understand was that silence could be strategic, that not responding didn't mean not preparing, that while he was talking, I was building, documenting, planning, preparing for a moment when his words would matter far less than my evidence. Research revealed something important. Cameron had done this before, not just to me, to 3 other women over the past 4 years. Senior managers and directors who'd shown promise, delivered results, and then been systematically marginalized through public criticism and credit theft. One had led a successful product launch. Cameron had presented it to the board as his initiative. She'd left 6 months later for a competitor. Another had developed client retention strategies that saved major accounts. Cameron had claimed credit. She transferred to a different division. A third had built operational improvements that reduced costs significantly. Cameron had taken ownership. She'd resigned. The pattern was clear to anyone actually looking. But nobody with power had looked. Or if they had, they decided Cameron's strategic value outweighed concerns about his treatment of female subordinates. Classic corporate calculation, talent retention versus executive performance. Except this time would be different. Because I wasn't leaving quietly, wasn't accepting the narrative, wasn't playing the role Cameron had assigned me. I was documenting the pattern, collecting evidence, building a case that wasn't just about me, it was about systemic behavior, about repeated abuse of power, about an executive whose success was built on stealing credit and destroying careers. That pattern was about to become very, very visible. Here's the risk Cameron took without fully understanding it. When he publicly positioned me as incapable of strategic thinking, he created documentation of his assessment. Meeting notes, emails referencing my limitations, recommendations to exclude me from leadership track discussions. Then he continued assigning me complex strategic work. The same work he just publicly said I wasn't capable of. Regional integration execution, client strategy development, cross-functional initiative management, work that required exactly the strategic thinking and leadership he'd claimed I lacked. This contradiction created exposure. If I truly lacked strategic capability, why was I leading strategic projects? If I couldn't think at executive level, why was I the point person on initiatives he presented to the board? The answer was obvious. My work was excellent, but Cameron wanted credit without sharing visibility. He needed me executing while he positioned himself as the strategic architect. But that contradiction was legally problematic. Performance documentation showing exceptional strategic work conflicted with his public statements about my limitations. That gap between what he said about me and what he actually had me doing created potential liability around discrimination and hostile work environment. Cameron had been so confident in his power that he hadn't considered how his words could be weaponized against him. That every public dismissal was creating evidence. That contradictions between his assessments and my actual responsibilities were building a legal foundation. The door opened from an unexpected direction. Our board had commissioned a comprehensive organizational review to assess leadership effectiveness and succession planning. External consultants, confidential interviews, analysis of performance data, retention metrics, and organizational health indicators. The consultants interviewed me as part of the process. Standard questions about role, responsibilities, career aspirations. Then they asked something that made me pause. What obstacles do you see to your professional growth here? I could have been diplomatic. Could have given safe corporate answers about wanting more visibility or strategic exposure. Instead, I was honest. Factual. Unemotional. I described the pattern. The public humiliation. The credit theft on regional integration. The systematic exclusion from leadership development despite performance that exceeded standards. I showed them documentation. Project files proving my strategic work. Performance reviews contradicting Cameron's public assessment. This isn't about personality conflict, I said carefully. It's about a pattern of behavior that impacts retention and organizational effectiveness. They took extensive notes, asked for permission to review additional documentation. I provided everything. Not angrily, not vindicatively, just comprehensively. 3 weeks later, I learned that the consultants had identified significant leadership concerns in the strategy division. They'd flagged retention issues, credit attribution problems, and patterns suggesting discriminatory behavior. The board was taking it seriously, very seriously. The call came from Horizon Technologies. Their chief strategy officer had heard about my work through industry connections. They were expanding rapidly, needed someone to build strategic capabilities from scratch, and my name kept coming up in conversations with people who'd worked with me. We're looking for a VP of Strategic Operations, she said, leading our transformation initiatives, building regional strategy, developing partnerships. Based on your track record at Sterling, you'd be perfect. Would you be interested in discussing it? VP level, 20% salary increase, stock options, direct report to the CSO, leadership role at a growing company that actually valued strategic thinking. I could have accepted immediately, could have used it as leverage at Sterling, could have walked away from Cameron and the humiliation and started fresh somewhere that recognized my capabilities. Instead, I said, I'm very interested. Can we schedule a conversation in about 6 weeks? I have some things I need to resolve here first. She agreed. We set a tentative timeline. I hung up feeling something shift. This wasn't just a backup plan anymore. It was proof. Validation from outside that Cameron's assessment had been wrong. That other organizations saw leadership capability he denied. But more importantly, it was leverage. Because sometimes the most powerful move isn't leaving. It's having the option to leave while choosing to stay long enough to ensure consequences. I stayed silent about everything. The board review, the external offer, the documentation I had compiled. I just continued working, attending meetings, delivering results. Maintained perfect professionalism while Cameron continued his pattern. People asked if I was okay. Colleagues who'd witnessed the humiliation would check in privately. That was really unfair what Cameron said in the meeting. You're incredibly strategic. Everyone knows it. I'd thank them and move on. Didn't complain. Didn't share plans. Didn't hint at what was building behind the scenes. Because the moment you signal that something's happening, people get defensive. Start covering tracks. Begin creating counter-narratives. Cameron certainly showed no concern. He'd moved on entirely from humiliating me. It was just another day of managing his empire, controlling narratives, building his reputation on other people's work. He had no idea that the organizational review was specifically examining his division. That consultants were interviewing current and former employees. That patterns were being identified and documented at board level. He didn't know about the external offer validating everything he denied about my capabilities. Didn't know I'd compiled comprehensive evidence of credit theft. Didn't know that his confidence was built on sand. And I kept it that way. Silent. Patient. Waiting for the moment when my preparation would matter more than his power. The moment came during a board strategy session. I'd been invited to present detailed analysis on regional market opportunities. Standard presentation. Cameron was in the room, along with the CEO, 3 board members, and the external consultants who conducted the organizational review. I presented my analysis, comprehensive data, strategic recommendations, implementation frameworks. Solid work. Then one of the board members asked a question that seemed innocent but wasn't. Elena, this analysis is excellent. Can you tell us about your role in the Regional Integration Initiative? I understand that was a significant strategic success. The room went quiet. Cameron shifted in his seat. I met the board members' eyes and understood immediately this was deliberate. The consultants had briefed the board. They were creating an opening. I led the Regional Integration Initiative from conception through execution, I said calmly. I identified the opportunity, conducted the analysis, developed the strategy, and managed implementation over 18 months. Cameron interrupted. Elena was certainly involved in the execution phase, but the strategic vision and board presentation were. I have documentation, I said quietly. Complete project files from initial concept through final implementation. Would you like me to share them? The board member nodded. Yes, I think that would be valuable context. I pulled up my organized files, projected them on the main screen. The room saw everything. Initial email from 21 months ago identifying the opportunity. Research files. Analysis documents. Strategy drafts. Implementation plans. All time-stamped. All showing my authorship. Cameron started to speak. These files show collaborative work. The strategy division operates as a team, and... Cameron, the CEO said quietly, let her finish. I walked through the timeline methodically. Month 1, opportunity identification. Months 2 through 6, comprehensive analysis and strategy development. Months 7 through 12, board approval and implementation planning. Months 13 through 18, execution and results measurement. Cameron became involved at month 14, I said factually. He attended final presentations and added his signature to completed documents. But the strategic work, identification, analysis, framework development, occurred months before his involvement. I pulled up the board presentation Cameron had delivered, then pulled up my draft from 3 months earlier. Identical slides, same analysis, same recommendations, just with his name instead of mine. I'm not making accusations, I said calmly. I'm just clarifying the project timeline and development process. Cameron's face had gone pale. He tried to explain. This is how strategic work happens. Ideas evolve through collaboration. The final presentation synthesized multiple inputs. Whose inputs? The board member asked. Can you name other contributors besides Elena? Silence. Cameron couldn't answer because there weren't other contributors. Just me. And him, at the end, taking credit. Cameron tried to recover. Talked about strategic vision and executive synthesis, and the difference between tactical execution and leadership presentation. Used every corporate buzzword available to reframe what was becoming undeniable. But his confidence was cracking. The board members weren't nodding sympathetically. They were asking pointed questions, looking at timestamps, comparing documents, seeing exactly what had happened. Cameron, another board member said, you told us you'd architected this initiative. that it represented your strategic vision for organizational transformation. Are you now saying Elena actually developed it? I'm saying strategic work is collaborative. Yes or no? Did Elena develop the regional integration strategy? Pause. Long pause. Cameron understood he was trapped. Lying would be provable. Admitting truth would destroy his credibility. Elena did extensive analytical work, he said finally, which I then shaped into the strategic framework presented to the board. By shaped, do you mean you changed her slides and presented them as your own? Cameron's expression shifted. Anger flashed briefly before he controlled it. I think there's some confusion about roles and responsibilities here. As VP, I'm responsible for strategic output for my division. Individual contributors execute under my direction. Elena wasn't an individual contributor. She was a senior strategy manager. And according to her documentation, she led this initiative independently. The room had shifted. Power was moving visibly. Questions that had been directed at me were now focused on Cameron. His explanations were sounding more defensive with each answer. The CEO spoke for the first time since I'd started presenting. Elena, thank you for the clarification. This is helpful context. He looked at Cameron. We'll need to discuss this further in executive session. Translation: Cameron was in serious trouble. The meeting continued, but the dynamic had fundamentally changed. Board members directed questions to me that they'd previously have asked Cameron, sought my perspective on strategic initiatives, treated me as the subject matter expert. Cameron sat silently, watching his authority dissolve in real time. Every attempt to reassert control just highlighted the problem. Every explanation made him sound less credible. After the meeting ended, the CEO asked me to stay. Cameron was excused. The board members remained. Elena, we owe you an apology, one board member said. The organizational review revealed patterns we should have caught earlier. Your situation isn't isolated. We're taking it seriously. The consultant report specifically flagged concerns about credit attribution and retention in the strategy division. Another added, combined with what we've just seen, we have significant leadership concerns. They asked if I'd be willing to work with an external counsel to document everything formally. I agreed. They thanked me for my professionalism and candor. Walking out, I felt something settle. Not triumph, just quiet certainty that consequences were inevitable now. That institutional machinery had started moving. That Cameron's power was ending whether he realized it yet or not. Over the next week, Cameron tried desperately to regain control. He called a strategy division meeting to reframe the situation. Talked about misunderstandings and communication gaps, and the importance of team unity. There seems to be some confusion about project ownership and credit, he said carefully. I want to be clear that I value everyone's contributions. Strategic work is inherently collaborative. We all play important roles. He looked directly at me. Elena, your analytical work on regional integration was valuable. I apologize if you felt your contributions weren't properly acknowledged. Notice the language. If you felt, not, I failed to acknowledge. Putting responsibility for perception on me, not action on him. I appreciate that, I said neutrally, giving him nothing to work with. He spent 30 minutes trying to rebuild his narrative, but everyone in that room had heard about the board meeting, had seen his authority questioned, had watched power shift away from him. Corporate environments are ruthless about authority. The moment people sense a leader is vulnerable, their influence erodes rapidly. Decisions that would have been accepted without question suddenly face scrutiny. Statements that would have been treated as direction get treated as suggestions. Cameron could feel it happening, could see people's deference fading, and there was nothing he could do because the board had already decided his credibility was compromised. The decision came 2 weeks later. I wasn't present for the executive session, but I learned the outcome from the CEO directly. He called me to his office, closed the door, and spoke with careful corporate precision. The board has decided to restructure the strategy division. Cameron will be transitioning to an advisory role focused on external partnerships. Effective immediately, you'll be promoted to VP of Strategic Operations, reporting directly to me. VP, the role Cameron had publicly said I'd never achieve. The leadership position he'd claimed I lacked the capability for. The board reviewed your work comprehensively, the CEO continued. Your documentation, performance history, and the consultant findings. They're confident you're the right person to lead strategy going forward. Thank you, I said simply. I want to be clear, this isn't about punishing Cameron. It's about organizational effectiveness and ensuring proper leadership. The board takes credit attribution and retention issues seriously. Translation: it was absolutely about Cameron's behavior, but they were framing it carefully to avoid legal exposure. We'll announce the restructure next week. Cameron's transition will be positioned as a strategic refocus, not a demotion. We're managing this quietly to protect everyone involved. Corporate speak for, we're covering up the real reasons to avoid embarrassment and potential lawsuits. But the result was what mattered. Cameron was out. I was in. Consequences had arrived. Cameron's exit was professionally managed. No dramatic termination. No public shaming. Just a carefully worded announcement about organizational evolution and strategic leadership changes. Cameron Foster would be transitioning to Senior Strategic Advisor, focusing on external partnerships and board-level initiatives. Elena Brooks would be promoted to VP of Strategic Operations, leading internal strategy development and execution. The corporate language was designed to sound neutral, but everyone who understood organizational dynamics knew what it meant. Advisor roles are where executives go to die professionally. No direct reports, no budget authority, no real power, just a title and an office while they looked for their next position elsewhere. Cameron cleaned out his office over a weekend. There was no farewell event, no celebratory send-off, just a quiet departure that spoke volumes about how badly he'd miscalculated. I didn't attend his final meetings, didn't seek him out for closure, didn't need confrontation or apology. The outcome was sufficient. He'd publicly declared I'd never lead there. Now he was leaving while I was leading. Some colleagues asked if I felt vindicated. I didn't. Vindication implies you were proving critics wrong. I'd simply been demonstrating what had always been true, that competence, documentation, and patience defeat politics eventually. My role evolved rapidly. The CEO gave me authority to restructure the strategy division. I promoted 2 talented women who'd been overlooked under Cameron, hired 3 new senior strategists with diverse backgrounds, built a team based on capability rather than political alignment. I implemented transparent credit attribution. When someone did exceptional work, their name appeared on presentations to the board. No more executives claiming credit for subordinates' analysis. No more strategic vision built on other people's insights without acknowledgement. The division's reputation improved quickly. Retention increased. People wanted to work on strategic initiatives because they knew they'd receive recognition for contributions. Quality of work went up when teams felt valued rather than exploited. Board members commented on the transformation. The strategy work is stronger than it's been in years, one told me. And the team seems energized. Whatever you're doing differently, keep doing it. What I was doing differently was simple: treating talented people with respect, giving credit where it belonged, and building success through competence rather than theft. Apparently that was revolutionary. 6 months into the role, I received the formal offer from Horizon Technologies again. VP role, excellent compensation, exciting opportunity. I politely declined, because I'd achieved what mattered, proving that leadership was about substance, not performance. About building things that lasted, not claiming things others built. Cameron reached out 8 months after his transition. Email, carefully worded, asking if we could meet for coffee to discuss past misunderstandings. I considered deleting it without response. Instead, I replied professionally, I appreciate you reaching out. I don't think a meeting would be productive at this point. I wish you well in your future endeavors. He responded immediately. Longer email. Talked about pressure of executive roles, mistakes made under stress. Hoped I could understand that competitive environments sometimes brought out behavior he wasn't proud of. Never quite apologizing, but acknowledging something had been wrong. I didn't respond to the second email, because his acknowledgement didn't matter anymore. His understanding didn't change anything. The situation had been resolved through institutional processes, not personal reconciliation. Some people need closure through conversation. I'd found closure through consequences, through watching behavior that had been enabled for years finally face accountability. Through proving that quiet competence outlasts loud confidence. His apology, if that's what it was, felt like trying to rewrite history, repositioning deliberate actions as mistakes, framing systematic credit theft as stress-induced lapses, seeking absolution that would make him feel better about behavior that had damaged careers. I didn't give him that absolution, not out of cruelty, just out of honesty. Some things don't deserve forgiveness. They deserve consequences. And consequences had already been delivered. People ask me what I learned from the experience. The answer isn't simple, but it's important. I learned that power in corporate environments isn't what it appears to be. Cameron seemed powerful, VP title, board relationships, command of rooms. But his power was performative, built on perception rather than substance. Real power is different. It's documentation that can't be disputed. Relationships built on trust rather than fear. Results that speak louder than presentations. Reputation that survives beyond immediate visibility. Loudness isn't leverage. Cameron was loud, confident, dominant in meetings. But when challenged with evidence, his loudness became defensive noise. When board members examined actual contributions, his confidence couldn't overcome facts. Visibility isn't value. Cameron was highly visible, presenting to boards, leading meetings, speaking at company events. But visibility without substance is just performance. When his actual contributions got examined, they were minimal compared to his prominence. Ego isn't effectiveness. Cameron's ego demanded credit, control, and deference. But ego creates vulnerability. It makes you sloppy, makes you underestimate people, makes you forget that the person you're dismissing might be documenting everything. I'd learned that patience defeats politics, that documentation defeats deception, that competence, given enough time and the right opportunity, defeats confidence, that the most dangerous person in a room isn't the loudest, it's the quietest one with receipts. Cameron told me I'd never lead here. He was right in a way. I didn't lead the same way he did. I didn't rule through fear. Didn't build success by stealing credit. Didn't maintain power by diminishing others. I led differently, through building rather than claiming, through documentation rather than performance, through substance rather than style. And that approach, that patient accumulation of evidence and results, proved more durable than his charisma. He thought humiliating me publicly would end my ambitions, that dismissing my capabilities would become accepted truth, that his power was sufficient to define my limitations. He underestimated what quiet people do when they're underestimated. We document. We prepare. We wait for the right moment. We understand that institutional change happens through evidence, not emotion. That boards care about patterns, not personalities. That consequences take time but eventually arrive. 3 years later, I'm still VP of Strategic Operations. Cameron left his advisory role after 6 months, moved to a smaller company, and has been careful about his reputation since. The strategy division is thriving. My team is strong. Results speak louder than presentations ever could. And every time someone tells a young professional, especially a young woman, that they'll never lead here, I think about Cameron's face in that board meeting. Watching documentation override his narrative. Watching evidence defeat his confidence. Watching power shift because competence, properly documented, is more powerful than charisma. He told me I'd never lead. He didn't realize the most dangerous person in the room is the one you think you've silenced. The one documenting while you're performing. The one building while you're claiming. The one who understands that patience isn't weakness, it's strategy. And strategy, executed properly, always wins.